had spent 300 years studying war. And his species had watched conflicts burn across the galaxy since before most civilizations learned to build fire. They did not fight. They observed. They recorded. They predicted. And in all his long centuries of work had never once been wrong about how a war would end. He stood now at the observation window of Station, a neutral platform floating high above a world called Prime. Below him, the planet turned slowly in the darkness. Beyond it, visible only as tiny points of light, a human colony world called New Haven waited for death. The Galactic Council had sent him here to document what they expected to be a quick and unremarkable conquest. The Dominion, a ruthless empire that had swallowed dozens of worlds, had turned its attention to human space. Their fleet numbered 800 warships. New Haven had 47. Had reviewed the data 100 times. His predictive models, refined over centuries, gave the humans a survival probability of less than 2%. The Council expected the conflict to last 6 standard days at most, privately believed it would be over in 4. He turned from the window when he heard footsteps behind him. A human woman entered the observation deck, her uniform crisp and her expression calm. She was of average height for her species, with brown hair cut short and eyes that seemed to hold a strange sort of patience. "Historian," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "I am Commander Lisa Grant. I have been assigned to assist you during your observation." Studied her for a moment. He had met humans before, but never one facing imminent destruction with such composure. His species showed their emotions through subtle shifts in their neck frills, but humans displayed everything on their faces. This one showed nothing but polite professionalism. "Commander Grant," he said, accepting her hand briefly. "I must express my diplomatic condolences for what is about to happen to your people. The Council holds humanity in reasonable regard, and this outcome is unfortunate." The human woman tilted her head slightly. A small smile appeared on her face. "That is kind of you, historian, but perhaps you should wait before offering condolences." Neck frills shifted with confusion. "The mathematics are quite clear, Commander. 800 against 47. Your technology is adequate but not exceptional. Your military experience is limited. There is no reasonable scenario in which New Haven survives." "You may be right," she said. She turned to look out the window at the stars. "But I have learned that humans often do unreasonable things." Before could respond, an alert chimed through the station. The fleet had arrived. He moved to the tactical display, his long fingers dancing across the controls. The screen filled with red icons, hundreds of them, arranged in the precise geometric formations that the favored. Their ships were larger than human vessels, better armed and crewed by soldiers who had conquered a dozen species. Against them a thin line of blue icons, 47 ships, ran the numbers again, hoping perhaps he had made an error. He had not. "The commander is broadcasting," Grant said. She touched a control and a harsh voice filled the observation deck. "Human colony New Haven, this is Fleet Commander of the Dominion. You have 12 standard hours to evacuate your military personnel and submit to peaceful occupation. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your population. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact." The message ended. Looked at Grant, expecting to see fear or despair. Instead, she was checking her communication device with the casual manner of someone reading a weather report. "Commander," he said carefully, "I have studied over 4,000 conflicts. In every case where the odds were this unfavorable, the defending force either surrendered or fled. No species has ever chosen annihilation over survival. Surely your leaders will see reason." Grant put away her device and looked at him with that strange patience still in her eyes. "Historian, would you like to visit our command center? I think you might find it educational." Hesitated. His role was to observe from a distance, to maintain neutrality. But something in the human's manner made him curious. He had documented 4,000 wars, and yet this woman was looking at him as if he had never seen a battle in his life. "Very well," he said. They took a shuttle down to the primary human vessel, a carrier called the Steadfast. It was an older ship, noted, with technology at least 2 generations behind the standard. The corridors were narrow and functional. The crew members they passed moved with purpose but not panic. The command center was a circular room filled with tactical displays and communication stations. Admiral Brooks stood at the central platform, a tall man with gray at his temples and scars on his hands. He was studying the formation with the focused attention of a predator watching prey. Found this confusing. The humans were the prey here. They had to know that. Admiral Grant said, "This is Historian, the Council Observer." Brooks turned and nodded once. "Historian, welcome aboard. I hope you brought plenty of recording equipment." "I have sufficient capacity to document a 6-day conflict," said. Something passed across the faces of the nearby crew. Several of them smiled. One officer laughed softly, did not understand what was amusing. 6 days, Brooks repeated. "Well, we will try to give you more than that." "Admiral, with respect, the mathematics of your situation are quite clear. They have overwhelming superiority in every measurable category. Your only rational option is negotiation or retreat." Brooks exchanged a look with Grant. Then he turned back to the tactical display. "Historian, let me ask you something. In all those 4,000 wars you studied, how many of them involved humans?" Searched his memory. 17, mostly minor border disputes with neighboring species. Humans won 9 of them, lost 8, an unremarkable record. "And did any of those conflicts involve a threat to human civilian populations? To our families, our children, our homes?" Checked his data. "No, they were military engagements over resources or territory." Brooks nodded slowly. "Then you have never seen what humans do when we are truly fighting, when there is nowhere to run and no one coming to save us." He pointed at the fleet on the display. "Those soldiers out there think they are coming to conquer a colony. They are wrong. They are coming to learn a lesson that will cost them more than they can imagine." The command center had gone quiet. Every crew member was watching their admiral, saw something in their faces that his 3 centuries of experience could not quite identify. "What lesson is that?" he asked. Admiral Brooks smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "That humanity does not surrender. We do not flee. We do not accept defeat." He turned to his crew. "All hands to battle stations. Signal the fleet. We advance in 1 hour." The command center erupted into controlled activity. Stood frozen, his predictive models screaming that everything he was seeing was wrong. Commander Grant touched his arm gently. "This is why I asked you to wait, Historian. Your mathematics may be correct, but mathematics do not account for everything." "What do they not account for?" asked. Grant looked at the display, at the tiny blue icons preparing to face the overwhelming red tide. "Us," she said simply. "They do not account for us." The 12 hours passed in strange silence. Remained in the command center of the Steadfast, watching the human crew prepare for what he believed would be their final hours. He expected fear. He expected despair. He expected the quiet acceptance of death that he had seen in 100 dying civilizations. Instead, he heard laughter. 2 young officers near the communication station were joking about something. A maintenance crew sang a song together as they worked on a damaged power conduit. Admiral Brooks shared a cup of some dark liquid with his senior staff while they reviewed their battle plans. The mood in the room was not grim. It was almost eager. Approached Commander Grant, who stood reviewing data on a tablet. "I do not understand what I am seeing," he admitted. "Your people are about to die. Why are they not afraid?" Grant looked up from her work. "They are afraid, Historian. Every single person on this ship knows the odds. They have families on New Haven, children, parents, friends. She paused. But fear and action are not the same thing. We have learned to be afraid and fight anyway. That is not logical. Fear exists to preserve life. To ignore it is to invite destruction. Perhaps, but we do not fight because we think we will win. She set down her tablet and faced him fully. We fight because surrender is worse than death. We fight because giving up means our children grow up under the. We fight because the alternative is unacceptable. A signal chimed. The 12 hours had ended. On the tactical display, the fleet began to move. Admiral Brooks took his position at the command platform. His voice carried across the room with calm authority. Signal the fleet. Execute formation Theta. All ships advance. Watch the blue icons begin to spread out across the display. They were not forming a defensive line. They were not clustering for mutual protection. Instead, they scattered into a thin, dispersed pattern that seemed to invite attack. "This formation is tactically unsound," he said to Grant. "You are exposing your ships to individual destruction." "Yes," she agreed, "we are." "Then why are you doing it?" "Because they expect us to fight like every other species they have conquered. They expect us to defend, to protect, to minimize losses." Grant smiled that patient smile again. "We are going to attack." The commander must have been confused as well. His fleet hesitated for a long moment, clearly uncertain how to respond to this unexpected behavior. Then he gave the order to engage. The first human ship to fall was a frigate called the Morning Star. Watched its icon flicker and vanish under concentrated fire. He noted the loss in his records. 1 ship down, 46 remaining. Then something happened that made him stop writing. The human ships did not retreat. They did not scatter for safety. Instead, every single vessel accelerated toward the enemy fleet. They pushed their engines beyond safe limits. They ignored the defensive maneuvers that any rational species would employ. They simply attacked, weapons blazing, headed straight into the heart of the formation. "This is suicide," said. His voice was barely a whisper. "No," Brooks said. He had heard the comment from across the room. "This is doctrine." The next hour changed everything thought he knew about war. Human pilots executed maneuvers that should have killed them. They pushed their ships into turns that exceeded safe gravitational limits. They took damage that should have disabled them and kept fighting. They rammed vessels when their weapons failed. They did things that no species in 4,000 documented conflicts had ever done. And they started winning. Not winning in the traditional sense. They were still losing ships. The numbers still favored them by an enormous margin. But they were losing ships too. More ships than they had planned. More ships than they thought possible. "Admiral," a sensor officer called out. "Fleet has lost 47 vessels. They are regrouping." Brooks nodded. "How many have we lost?" 12, sir." Ran the calculations in his head. 12 human ships had destroyed 47 warships. That was a kill ratio of nearly 4-to-1 against a superior enemy. It was impossible. It violated every model he had ever created. "How?" he asked. "How is this happening?" Grant brought up a display showing human pilot performance data. "Do you see these readings, historian? These are the gravitational forces our pilots are experiencing. 14, 15, 16 times standard gravity. Any pilot would lose consciousness at these levels. Their bodies simply cannot handle it." Studied the numbers. But these forces would cause severe physical damage, internal bleeding, broken blood vessels. Your pilots are injuring themselves. "Yes, they are." Grant's voice was matter of fact. "And they are doing it on purpose. They know that if they push harder than the enemy can push, they will have an advantage, so they push until their bodies break." On the display, a human destroyer engaged 3 cruisers simultaneously. Its pilot pulled a turn so sharp that saw the ship's hull visibly bend from the stress. 2 of the ships tried to follow and failed. Their pilots blacked out. The human destroyed them both before the third cruiser could respond. "Your people are destroying themselves to fight," said. He could not keep the horror from his voice. "We call it commitment," Brooks said. He had moved closer, watching the battle with fierce concentration. "Every species has limits, physical limits, psychological limits. The difference is that humans treat limits as suggestions. We break ourselves to break the enemy." A communication came through from one of the human ships. The voice was strained, clearly in pain. "Steadfast, this is Captain Maria Cole of the destroyer Defiant. I have lost main engines and half my weapons. Requesting permission to execute ramming attack on command ship." Brooks did not hesitate. Permission granted. Defiant, make it count. Watched a damaged human ship accelerate on emergency power toward the largest vessel in the formation. Defense fire hammered it from all sides. Sections of the hull tore away. Escape pods did not launch. The crew stayed at their stations. The Defiant struck the command ship at full speed. Both vessels disappeared in a blinding explosion. "Captain Cole and her crew are gone," the sensor officer reported. His voice was steady. "Command ship destroyed. Enemy fleet showing signs of disorganization." Around the command center, the human crew continued their work. Some wiped tears from their eyes. None stopped fighting. Finally understood what he was seeing. Humans did not fight like other species because they did not think like other species. They did not calculate acceptable losses. They did not weigh survival against victory. They simply decided that defeat was not an option and then did whatever was necessary to prevent it, even if it meant dying. "Historian," Brooks said quietly, "you asked earlier what your mathematics do not account for. This is your answer. We are not fighting to survive this battle. We are fighting to make victory so expensive that they will never try again." The fleet was retreating now, pulling back to regroup. They had lost over 100 ships. They had expected to lose perhaps a dozen. Their commander was reportedly screaming at his subordinates, demanding explanations that no one could give. Grant stood beside, watching the enemy withdraw. "This is just the first engagement," she said. "They will come back. They will bring more ships, and we will make them pay for everyone they send." "You cannot win," said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Perhaps not," Grant admitted, "but we can make them bleed, and sometimes, historian, that is enough." 3 days into the battle for New Haven, visited the medical bay of the Steadfast. He had documented thousands of wars from observation platforms and orbital stations. He had never walked among the wounded. He had never smelled blood or heard the sounds of suffering up close. The medical bay was crowded. Injured crew members filled every bed and spilled out into the corridors. Doctors and nurses moved between them with exhausted efficiency. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, something metallic and wrong. Commander Grant walked beside him, guiding him through the organized chaos. "I thought you should see this," she said. "If you are going to document this war, you should understand what it costs." A young man lay on a bed near the entrance. His flight suit had been cut away, revealing burns that covered most of his chest and arms. His face was pale with pain, but his eyes were alert, tracking as he approached. "This is Lieutenant Santos," Grant said. "He was a pilot on the carrier Swift Wind until yesterday. His fighter was destroyed during the second engagement." Looked at the burns, at the bandages, at the tubes delivering medication into the young man's arm. How did he survive? "He ejected at the last moment. Spent 14 hours floating in space before rescue teams found him." Grant paused. "The rescue ship was destroyed during extraction. He transferred to an escape pod with 3 other survivors. They were picked up 6 hours later." Santos was watching with an expression the historian could not read. "You are the council observer," the lieutenant said. His voice was rough. "The one who is writing down everything that happens." "I am," confirmed. "I am documenting this conflict for the historical record." "Good," Santos shifted on his bed, wincing at the movement. Make sure you write this part too. The part where we kept fighting even after everything went wrong. Pulled out his recording device. May I ask you some questions, Lieutenant? Go ahead. Your ship was destroyed. You were severely injured. You spent hours alone in space, uncertain of rescue. You watched the ship that came to save you get destroyed as well. Paused, trying to phrase his question carefully. At any point during this experience did you consider surrender? Did you think about giving up? Santos looked at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a painful sound, broken by coughing, but genuine. Give up to who? The vacuum. He shook his head slowly. I was floating out there watching my friends die, watching our ships burn, and all I could think about was getting back in the fight, finding another ship, making those monsters pay for every single person we lost. But why? Asked. You could have died. You nearly did die. Why continue fighting when the outcome was so uncertain? The lieutenant's eyes hardened. Because my parents are on New Haven. My little sister is on New Haven. My girlfriend teaches 3rd grade at a school on the northern continent. His burned hand clenched the. If I stop fighting, what happens to them? If all of us stop fighting, what happens to everyone we love? Recorded the response. He had heard similar sentiments from warriors of other species, but there was something different in the way humans expressed it. Other species fought for duty or honor or survival. Humans seemed to fight out of something deeper, something personal and fierce. Grant led him deeper into the medical bay, past rows of injured crew members. Some were conscious, talking quietly with visitors or staring at the ceiling. Others were sedated, their bodies wrapped in healing compounds and regeneration fields. A few beds held forms covered entirely by white sheets. We have lost 31 ships, Grant said quietly. Over 4,000 crew members dead, another 2,000 wounded. She stopped beside a bed where a woman lay unconscious, her head wrapped in bandages. This is Commander Lane. She was the executive officer of the destroyer Relentless. She stayed at her post even after the bridge was breached, coordinating damage control while the atmosphere vented around her. Is she going to survive? The doctors are not certain. She suffered severe oxygen deprivation before rescue teams reached her. Grant looked at the unconscious woman with something like pride. She saved her ship. The Relentless is still fighting. They moved on. Saw a man with both legs missing, already asking when he could return to duty. He saw a woman with burns across her face, dictating letters to her children in case she did not survive the next surgery. He saw a teenager, barely old enough to serve, crying quietly while a nurse held his hand. This is the cost, Grant said. This is what we pay to keep fighting, and every single person here would pay it again if they had to. Stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the medical bay, surrounded by human suffering, and felt something he had not experienced in 3 centuries of observing wars. He felt small. He felt like all his knowledge and all his predictions meant nothing in the face of what these people were willing to endure. Why? He asked. The word came out as almost a plea. I have watched species surrender when they lost 10% of their forces. I have watched empires collapse when the cost of fighting exceeded the value of winning. Why do you keep going when the price is so high? Grant considered the question. Then she sat down on an empty bed and gestured for to join her. Historian, let me tell you about human history, not the parts you have in your database, the parts we do not talk about with outsiders. She spoke for a long time. She told him about wars that lasted generations, about cities that burned and were rebuilt and burned again, about people who lost everything and started over from nothing, about resistance movements that fought for decades against impossible odds because the alternative was unthinkable. We have been doing this forever, she said, fighting when we should not, surviving when we should not. Every time someone tells us that something is impossible, we find a way to do it anyway. It is not courage. It is not bravery. It is simply who we are. But you cannot sustain these losses indefinitely. Eventually, the mathematics will catch up with you. Perhaps. Grant stood up and looked around the medical bay. But today is not that day. Tomorrow is not that day. And as long as we have people willing to bleed for each other, the day of our defeat will keep getting pushed further and further away. An alarm sounded. They were attacking again. Grant moved toward the door. You should return to the observation deck, historian. The next phase of the battle is about to begin. Followed her, his mind struggling to process everything he had seen and heard. Behind him, the wounded crew of the Steadfast watched him go. Some nodded, some saluted. All of them had the same look in their eyes. They were not ready to give up. They were not ready to stop. They would keep fighting until they won or until none of them were left. And for the first time in his long career, did not know how to predict what would happen next. The second week of the battle brought changes that did not expect. They had received reinforcements. Their fleet now numbered over 1,000 ships. They had adapted their tactics, learning from the mistakes of the first engagements. They were cautious now, methodical, grinding down the human defenses with patient precision. The humans had 19 ships left. Watched from the command center of the Steadfast as Admiral Brooks coordinated the defense. The man had not slept in 3 days. His eyes were red, his uniform stained, his hands trembling from stimulant injections. But his voice remained steady, and his crew still followed his orders without hesitation. Landing forces have established a beachhead on the southern continent, a tactical officer reported. Approximately 50,000 ground troops with armored support. What is our defensive strength in that region? Brooks asked. Regular military forces number about 8,000. We have received reports of civilian volunteers joining the defense, but we cannot confirm numbers. Brooks nodded slowly. Tell them to hold. We are repositioning the fleet to provide orbital support. Moved closer to Commander Grant, who was monitoring communications from the surface. Civilian volunteers, he asked. Your non-military population is joining the fight. Grant looked up from her console. The bombed 3 cities yesterday, schools, hospitals, residential areas. Her voice was flat, controlled. They thought terror would break our morale. They thought we would beg for peace. And instead, 60% of the civilians who were offered evacuation refused to leave. They are picking up weapons and fighting alongside our soldiers. Grant's expression shifted to something hard and cold. They made a mistake, historian. They made this personal. Over the next several hours, monitored the ground battle through intercepted communications and sensor data. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. Human soldiers held positions long after they should have retreated. They fought in destroyed buildings and burning forests. They ambushed patrols and disappeared before reinforcements arrived. They used the terrain, the weather, and their own bodies as weapons. A report came in from a small town called. A school teacher named Cole had organized local residents into a resistance cell. Over the past 3 days, her group had destroyed 3 supply depots and killed over 200 enemy soldiers. She had no military training. She had been teaching history to children a month ago. How is this possible? Asked. These are civilians, farmers and teachers and shopkeepers. How can they fight professional soldiers? Brooks overheard the question. He turned from the tactical display with exhaustion in his eyes but fire in his voice. Because they are fighting for their homes, their families, their way of life. He gestured at the surface map showing human positions across New Haven. Every single one of those people has decided that death is preferable to surrender. They have never faced that before. They do not know how to respond. A communication came in from the planet's surface. A young man's voice, strained but determined. Steadfast, this is Corporal Danny, 3rd Infantry Division. We are surrounded at grid reference 77. Enemy forces estimated at 2,000. We have 43 soldiers and about 100 civilians who refuse to leave. requesting orders. Brooks closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his voice was gentle. "Corporal, what is your assessment of the situation?" "Sir, we cannot hold this position. We do not have the numbers or the firepower, but if we retreat, the civilians behind us will be overrun." A pause. "Sir, I am not going to let that happen. My people are not going to let that happen." "Understood, Corporal. Can you hold for 6 hours? We are repositioning forces for a counterattack." "We will hold for as long as you need, sir. 3rd Infantry does not run." The communication ended. Grant was monitoring the position on her console. Could see the enemy forces closing in, the tiny human position shrinking with each passing minute. "They are going to die," he said. "Maybe," Grant acknowledged. "But they are going to buy time for the people behind them. And when they finally break through, they will find nothing but empty shelters. The civilians will be gone. The soldiers will have accomplished their mission." "What mission?" "They are sacrificing themselves for a delay, a few hours of time." Grant turned to face him fully. "Historian, let me explain something about humans. We have a concept called spite. It is not just the desire to win. It is the absolute refusal to let our enemies have satisfaction. Even when we are losing, even when death is certain, we will deny our opponents their victory in any way we can." She pointed at the display. "Those soldiers down there know they are going to die, but they also know that every they kill, every hour they delay the advance, every civilian they save is a defeat for the enemy. They are not dying for nothing. They are dying to make the pay." The commander must have reached the same conclusion because his tactics changed over the following days. He ordered orbital bombardment of civilian population centers, trying to break human morale through terror. Cities burned. Thousands died. The Council observation station recorded everything with mechanical precision. But the humans did not break. Instead, the surviving fleet launched a desperate counterattack. 19 ships against hundreds. They should have been destroyed in minutes. Instead, they fought for 12 hours straight, pushing their crews beyond any reasonable limit. Learned that humans could operate effectively for over 40 hours without sleep if properly motivated. Crews required rest every 8 hours. By the time they finally drove the human fleet back, they had lost another 150 ships. The Steadfast was crippled in the engagement. Admiral Brooks transferred his flag to a converted cargo vessel armed with weapons stripped from destroyed ships. He refused to stop fighting. A week later, they had lost over 400 ships. Their ground forces had suffered 60% casualties. Their commander had executed 3 of his own officers for suggesting retreat. And still the humans fought. Found himself unable to sleep. He spent his nights reviewing data, trying to understand what he was seeing. His predictive models were useless. Every calculation showed that the humans should have surrendered weeks ago. Every analysis concluded that continued resistance was irrational. But the humans did not seem to care about rational. They cared about something else entirely. On the 28th day of the battle, found Commander Grant standing alone on the observation deck. She was looking down at New Haven, at the fires burning on the night side of the planet. "You are winning," he said quietly. "I do not understand how, but you are winning." Grant shook her head. "We are not winning, historian. We are surviving. There is a difference." She turned to face him. "But surviving is enough. If we can make this fight too expensive, too painful, too bloody for it to continue, then we win without winning. They go home defeated and New Haven remains free. And if they do not give up, if they bring more ships, more soldiers, more weapons." Grant smiled. It was a tired smile, worn thin by weeks of battle. "Then we keep fighting, until there is no one left to fight, until the last human on New Haven draws their last breath." She looked back at the planet below. "That is who we are, historian. That is what your mathematics do not understand." Stood beside her in silence, watching the fires burn. For the first time in 3 centuries, He did not know what to write in his report. The battle for New Haven lasted 47 days. When it ended, stood on the observation deck of station and looked down at a world that should have been conquered. Below him, human ships moved through the debris fields left by weeks of fighting. Recovery teams searched for survivors. Medical vessels carried the wounded to orbital hospitals. New Haven had survived. The Dominion had lost over 600 ships. Their ground forces had been effectively destroyed, with casualty rates exceeding 80%. Their fleet commander had taken his own life rather than report his failure to the Dominion Council. The remaining ships had retreated in disarray, and intelligence suggested they would not be returning. The humans had lost 39 of their 47 ships. Nearly 200,000 soldiers and civilians had died. Their cities were burned, their infrastructure shattered, their economy devastated. By any reasonable measure, they had suffered terrible losses. But they had won. Commander Grant found him at the observation window. She looked different now, weeks of constant combat having worn away something soft in her features. But her eyes still held that strange patience, that unshakable calm. "You are leaving," she said. "It was not a question. The Council has recalled me to present my findings. They are eager to understand what happened here." Grant nodded. "What will you tell them?" Had been thinking about this question for days. He had filled thousands of pages with observations, recordings, and analyses. He had documented every battle, every sacrifice, every impossible moment of human resistance. But he still did not know how to explain what he had witnessed. "I will tell them the truth," he said slowly, "that everything I thought I knew about warfare was wrong, that humans do not fight like other species, do not think like other species, do not surrender like other species." He turned to face her. "I will tell them that humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the most advanced or the most numerous, but they possess something that cannot be measured or predicted. A willingness to suffer, to sacrifice, to endure any cost in pursuit of victory." "And what will you recommend?" Considered the question carefully. "I will recommend that the Council never allows itself to become an enemy of humanity, because now I understand what that means. It means a war that will not end until one side is completely destroyed, and humans, it seems, are very difficult to destroy." Grant smiled slightly. "That is a wise recommendation, historian." 2 weeks later, stood before the Galactic Council in their great chamber on the neutral world of. Hundreds of representatives from dozens of species watched as he presented his findings. He spoke for 3 hours, describing the battle in detail, showing recordings, sharing interviews with human survivors. When he finished, the chamber was silent. Finally, one of the senior counselors, an ancient being from a species that had watched empires rise and fall, spoke. "Historian, you have documented a remarkable conflict, but surely this was an anomaly. Surely if the galaxy united against humanity, if we brought overwhelming force to bear, we could defeat them." Had prepared for this question. "Honored counselor, you could destroy them eventually. With sufficient numbers and resources, you could burn their worlds and shatter their fleets, but the cost would be beyond anything you can imagine." He activated a display showing the casualty figures from New Haven. The sent 800 ships to conquer a single colony world defended by 47 vessels. They lost 600. They brought 50,000 ground troops against 8,000 defenders and local militia. They lost over 40,000. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. And this was for one world. Humanity has dozens of colonies, a home world with billions of inhabitants, military academies training new soldiers every day. If you tried to conquer all of human space, you would be fighting for generations. Centuries, perhaps. The ancient counselor leaned forward. "But we would win eventually." "Would you?" asked. "I watched humans fight for 47 days against impossible odds. I watched them sacrifice themselves without hesitation. I watched civilians pick up weapons and die beside soldiers. I watched a species that simply refused to accept defeat, no matter what it cost them. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from species that had conquered worlds and built empires. You would win a galaxy of ashes, because humanity does not believe in losing. They would burn everything, including themselves, before they let you take it from them. The chamber remained silent. I believed I understood war, continued. I had documented 4,000 conflicts. I had seen civilizations rise and fall. I thought I had seen everything there was to see about how species fight and die. He thought of Commander Grant and her patient smile. He thought of Lieutenant Santos with his burned body and unbroken spirit. He thought of Admiral Brooks commanding a cargo ship against warships because he refused to stop fighting. He thought of Cole, the school teacher who had become a resistance leader. But I had never seen humanity unleashed. I had never watched a species fight not because they believed they would win, but because they believed that fighting was the only acceptable choice. I had never encountered beings who would accept any cost, endure any suffering, make any sacrifice, simply because surrender was worse than death. He deactivated his display and stood alone before the council. If you want my recommendation, honored counselors, it is this: make humanity your allies, trade with them, cooperate with them, treat them with respect and fairness. He paused. Or leave them alone entirely, because there is no middle ground with humans. There is no limited war, no acceptable compromise, no negotiated peace if you threaten what they love. He thought of New Haven burning. He thought of the ships that had rammed enemy vessels rather than retreat. He thought of the soldiers who had held impossible positions until the last one fell. There is only total war, and they will always, always be more willing to pay that price than you are. The Galactic Council deliberated for 3 days. When they emerged, they issued a formal decree. Humanity was to be treated as a protected species under Council law. No member nation would engage in hostile action against human space. Trade relations would be established. Diplomatic missions would be exchanged. The Dominion quietly from all territories bordering human space. They never explained why. They never spoke of New Haven again. Returned to and spent the remaining decades of his life writing a comprehensive history of the Battle of New Haven. It became required reading in military academies across the galaxy. Species that had never encountered humans studied it carefully, learning what it meant to face an enemy that would not break. On the final page, wrote a simple conclusion. In 3 centuries of documenting warfare, I learned that most species fight to survive. They calculate costs and benefits. They retreat when the odds grow too long. They surrender when defeat becomes inevitable. Humans do not fight to survive. They fight because surrender is not in their nature. They fight because protecting their families and their homes matters more than their own lives. They fight because the alternative is unthinkable. I believed I understood war. I was wrong. I had never seen humanity unleashed. Now I have, and I will never forget it. On New Haven, the survivors rebuilt their cities and buried their dead. They planted gardens in the craters left by orbital bombardment. They raised children who would grow up free because their parents had refused to surrender. And in the quiet moments, when the sun set over the landscape, they remembered the price they had paid. They remembered the friends they had lost. They remembered the impossible odds they had faced and the victory they had earned through blood and fire and unbreakable will. They had been tested, and they had not been found wanting. They were human. That was enough.